Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder it's time to go through a dev Q&A which is going through the Ballistics updates. Now if I remember correctly, a lot of the questions were actually asked yesterday and answered on the official forum, and now this is kind of like a condensed version of the questions which Gaijin themselves believe are interesting, or at least the ones which were answered on the forum. On top of this, I would just like to say it is nice that they are addressing the community criticism around the changes, and generally, over the last year or so, as I said many times last year, in 2018, there was obviously a shift in Gaijin when it came to addressing the community about issues. Like we had those videos from Kirill, we had videos from BVVD talking about the parts and FPE stuff, and now even whenever there is like a community consensus or community discussion or debate around a topic, they normally do either a Q&A on it, they either make a video, or they respond to it in some way which is more official. And I think this is a much better way of doing things compared to what we had before, and it's nice to see that this trend is moving into 2019 as well. I think more openness from Gaijin in general is always better. I understand that there has to be some things which are privatized, such as, you know, content coming out in the future, but when it comes to ideas around why you are changing specific mechanics or their point of view, I definitely think it is very much required, because as somebody who works in an environment where there can be a lot of times where you see people doing certain things and it's very hard to understand their methodology of why they're doing it, and then when you actually talk to them about it and go through, it's like, oh, okay, well that completely makes sense, but from an outsider's point of view, it can be hard. And also sometimes when you're stuck in one way of thinking, sometimes you need an outside force to come in and say, hey, have you thought about it like this? What about plan B? What about plan 1.5? You know, and so it's nice to see that we're getting clarification on how they are thinking about certain things. Now, obviously, this includes a lot of platitudes. It includes a lot of stuff which is not really required, but is there to make sure that it sounds a bit more PR-y, and I understand why people do that, but it is how it is. So they go through this set of paragraphs here, and they basically go through why they have decided to pick this set of calculations, you know, the DeMar formulas and the Lanz-Odermatt ones, and also, you know, why they are doing it. So straight off the bat, if you were wondering, well, this change is terrible, you know, I don't understand why they're doing it, right here. 4 paragraphs, bang, 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 tells you exactly why they're doing it. So, therefore, if you have any questions about the thought process behind it, well, it's answered right here. The only thing I would have liked to see in this, which isn't here, is the specific formulas themselves. Because I have looked up the DeMar formulas. There is 2 of them, which I use for different things. And then you've got the Lanz-Odermatt one, which is also, depending on how you look at it, there is a bunch of different formulas around that. And therefore, I would have loved to see, just from an analytical point of view, exactly the formulas that are being used. Now, I'm sure over time, now that they've given us some of the constants which are being used in these formulas, we can use that calculator to work out exactly what's going on and with the formulas, but it would just be nice to have that clarified, you know, just have a page where it's like, right, we're using this for this, we're using this for this, these are the equations, if there are any discrepancies, let us know, and then people can actually critique the equations themselves and make sure to understand them, because what I've seen is a lot of people talking about these equations and having no idea what they look like, and having no idea what constants are, and not understanding how to break down equations themselves. So I think just having them out in the open and showing people, and then you can discuss around it, is the way to do it, instead of just holding them behind, which adds a layer of secrecy, which I don't think is required, since eventually there are going to be players in the player base who work out these equations anyway. So, let's get into the Q&A section of the document, or news section, whatever you want to call it. So the first question is, will primary source material, if it contradicts the calculated performance, still be taken into consideration for the newly calculated APFS-DS rounds? For example, the Swedish tests show vertical performance of DM33, and it is substantially higher than calculated values. The answer is, in the calculation, we use the density of tungsten cores equal to 17,500 kilograms per meters cubed, indicated in the published table sheet with changes. This corresponds to the second class of tungsten alloy from the specification. The choice of this density value has been made due to the fact that the exact density values at the moment are unknown to us. In this case, if reliable and unambiguous, based on documents, shooting reports, etc., information about the density of cores is provided, we are ready to clarify it for the appropriate ammunition. Until such data is available, we are fully satisfied with the current data scores for the ammunition. So the basic answer is no, we are going to use this constant, and this is the constant we want to use because we like the idea of standardizing it, and also because you are talking about rounds from the 90s, from the 2000s eventually when we get to them, the issue is once again classification. Classified information exists. A lot of people have been talking about the Challenger 2's armor and what it is and what it's close to. We don't know. We don't fully know the Challenger 1's armor. I mean, there are a few actual what would you call them? Documents, or let's call them scholarship work, which go through the Challenger 1's armor and have actually measured it, but we still don't know the full composition of the Chobham armor used on the Challenger 1. Therefore, we can't ever know the actual armor until it is fully released by the British government, or at least through like the Freedom of Information Act, which will probably come when it gets decommissioned and all of that stuff. But the main thing is, nowadays, if we look at modern vehicles from the last 30 years, it's very hard to get accurate, when I mean accurate, I mean completely accurate information, and everything that you find is either guesses or estimates based on calculations made. So a lot of people who are talking about the armor values and the penetration values of specific rounds just understand that you are having a go at calculations which are being made through the Lanz-Odermatt system and also the DeMar formulae, while also basing it off other calculations that other people have made using different formulae. Like, that's what we're at right now. It's just which formulae do you choose, and which set of constants do you use. So I think using a standardized one and just saying, right, we know this one, we're gonna use this one, that's fine, let's do it. Also, the Swedish tests, there are inherent issues with the Swedish tests. We've talked about before the problems with export models, and also the fact that some of the armor packages were made up to the point of where it was supposed to be like what was seen on the actual armor of the machines of each country. Obviously, this creates inherent issues because then you have biasy thrown into who actually is creating the armor packages, and also even if you are an ally of another country, you do not give them all of your secrets. You may share some, like in the EU we have the whole I don't want to call it triad, but there are countries which share information between them, but there are still state secrets, especially when it comes to military stuff. I think one day I will go through the Swedish tests and go through the issues that I personally have them as using them as a standard for a lot of vehicles, because there is inherent problems with standard models of vehicles and then export versions of vehicles that I don't think people fully understand. And you can take an export vehicle and fill it full of what you think the standard vehicle has for armor, and it could still be wrong, and probably is wrong, as we found from a lot of calculations which were done in the 80s and the 90s about Chobham armor, who were just categorically wrong when the first initial testing of Chobham armor was released, and when we found out that a bunch of different factors were put into actual Chobham armor that people thought before. I think about how in the 60s people thought that they made predictions about the 80s, or think about in the 80s how they make predictions about the 2000s. Like, some of the predictions are going to be way off, some of them are going to be close, and it just kind of is how it is. So I think still using the standardized system, it's a good idea, especially for modern vehicles. It puts them all in an equal playing field. It's what is required. If there are armor values on tanks that are based on what rounds can and cannot penetrate them, both by design specification and performance in combat, will we see armor changes where appropriate? No. Such changes would contradict the goals we set when developing this method. There are no plans to introduce an additional indicator of the quality of the armor except for what is already in game. I just want to point out that a few years ago, we had, let's call them armor modifiers, which were put into the game for specific vehicles when we had the Soviet and the German vehicles running around, and people hated that, and now it seems to just be accepted that that is an okay thing now. I don't know what happened or when this idea changed, but I would like to know, because I'm very confused. How a few years ago, this idea of armor modifiers was bad, and now today, it's okay. So, which is it? And also, if we're talking about modern day vehicles, they've already said they are working off estimates, they are working off information that they can find, but obviously, all these armor values, everything like that, is classified. So therefore, they just have to work off what they know, and they're much more focused on top tier of balancing the vehicles against each other instead of the actual historical, documents behind them, because you literally can't get your hands on them. So, I mean, what else can you say? I don't know what else to say with that. It's just very odd that, one moment, a few years ago, this idea is bad, and now in this moment today, this idea is good. I don't know. I think we'll just move on. I've talked about it before. Will the DeMar equation that is being used be fixed? What? A fair amount of APC-BC rounds would be overperforming, much higher than historic data, if we use the current calculation from the wiki. By choosing the method, we knew that there would be some discrepancies, both in the smaller and in the larger direction. And after the evaluation of possible negatives and positives, we decided that the general level of changes in values is comfortable for us by not exceeding the level of conditionality that had already been there before. It makes many more improvements, and last but not least, it reveals the method of penetration calculation for everyone and makes it clear. Therefore, there are no plans to make any corrections to the calculations aimed at fitting the data to various sources. So this is a thing I talked about before. Like, if there are, let's say, large discrepancies in the formula with specific vehicles, would those vehicles be able to have their historical pen values? The problem with this is once you break the rule once, you have opened up Pandora's box. Because then you get everyone coming out of the woodwork asking for their specific vehicle to also be changed. So what you have to do is you either have to go whole hog standardized equations, or you have to go whole hog historical data. Well, we can't go historical data because there are machines in the game now, which once again classified, or just do not have the same level of testing, let's say, that other machines have, right? We have, think about the Ho reproduction, right? It's got the 105mm on it. We know the gun was built. Do we know that the rounds were tested? Then there's also other guns in the game which definitely do not have the same testing standards as others. Even if you compare, let's say, the 4 major nations or the 3 major nations, America, Germany, and the Soviets, and then Britain, all tested their penetration on their guns differently. So even from that point of view, you could say that there is an inherent bias within these systems. And that is the problem. That is what you're trying to eliminate. If you can eliminate the bias between the systems, you should be Gucci. You should be at a point where it's like, okay, even though we're a little bit off in some historical data, at least everyone is playing by the same rules. And in a video game environment, that's kind of what you need. You need everybody to be at least starting from the same standard. Otherwise, there's always going to be calls for bias. Literally just like there has been for years for the majority of vehicles in the game. And if you have 1 or 2 conflicting sources, you're screwed as a game developer. You can't win. Like, there is no winning unless you standardize and just say, okay, everything is going to work from this standard. And that is it. And this is the equation we're using. Bish, bash, bosh. If you're not happy with it, we can talk about, the values we put into the formula. Those can be sorted out. But otherwise, what the hell are we going to do here, right? And then it kind of screws up the more modern vehicles that they want to put in the game, because then you just get a whole heap of people talking about the issues with penetration. The amount of articles and the amount of data and the amount of historical documents I've had to go go through just for the Abrams, looking at the shells for the Abrams and how they work and everything like that, it just shows how so many people have so many different opinions and facts also, which is kind of worrying, about the rounds themselves, and how they are interpreted in different ways, which really worries me in a way, and it is how it is. So I think, as it says, yes, some rounds will be overperforming, some rounds are probably underperforming, but overall, that can be balanced by BR, that can unfortunately be balanced by repair cost, and from there, we can then use this system to make everything easier in the future. The slope modifier equations from World War II ballistics, armor, and gunnery were designed to work with the vertical penetration values from the book. Changing these values while also changing the vertical penetration of many projectiles, many lower and some higher, will cause issues. How is this going to be handled? We do not want and will not allow situations that violate the integrity of the selected calculation method. Using the calculated values of slopes together with the old method of choosing armor piercing will just be such a situation. So this question is literally the same as the one above it. I have no idea why. Well, sorry, it's the same answer. It's literally, will you compromise this standardized method that you want to use? No. Because otherwise, it opens up Pandora's box. Like, it's the same question and answer, basically, with different words. The DeMar formula relies on an empirically derived constant. This constant differs based on armor projectile combination. How do you plan to determine this constant, given the vast array of armor and projectiles types in the game? Now, this is a great question, actually. Earlier in the game, as previously indicated, the penetration values were given for armor of low hardness. The constant for the calculation has been chosen so as to also correspond to this armor. The value is 1900 and corresponds to the homogeneous armor of low hardness. So there's your answer. And therefore, now, once again, standardized system. Are people going to be happy with this answer, which were already against the system? No, because it means that, once again, they've had to make sure to pick every set of armor having a standard type. And the problem with historical documents is that it either takes this into account or it doesn't take this into account, and it can get very messy. I'll just get into that. So, having a constant be the same for everything is great, because it's a constant. It has to stay the same. Does standardizing penetration performance of ammunition also allow for standardizing secondary fragmentation for ammunition? Right now, all rounds that utilize the long rod shatter preset create less fragmentation than rounds with less weight, thickness, and velocity. This is also noticeable on APDS, where an APDS round with a comparable penetrator diameter to an AP round creates much less fragments. The applied calculation method of armor-piercing data acquisition is not connected with secondary fragments configuration. This problem is known and will be corrected. So, yeah, the actual penetration of the round is not connected to the post-penetration effect, is basically what they're saying. So if the round penetrates, then there's a different calculation or a different idea that goes into what happens after it penetrates. The DeMar formula and the Lanzonomat are just interested in when it hits and if it penetrates at that single pixel point where it hits. So there are definitely issues with specific APDS. As a guy who plays a lot of British tanks, playing stuff such as the Centurion Mark 1, Centurion Mark 3, Mark 10, Carnarvon, can be infuriating because, you know, you pen the Tiger turret and you yellow a crew or you orange a crew. And this is not just an issue with the amount of damage that APDS does, because sometimes you can go straight through and do a ton of damage. It's also an issue with crews and how much vitality they have as well. There is such a massive difference between a stock crew and a fully upgraded aced crew that it's such an advantage in the game. But I'm kind of okay with that advantage, because as you go up the tiers, you should get better crews. It's just, it becomes an issue when people are playing lower tiers and they have these really good crews as well. But, you know, you can't stop people playing what they want to play. On top of this, they did say in the original post about the ballistics updates with the calculations that APDS was, they didn't say it wasn't connected, but they did say that they hadn't either worked out the values yet or that it would get changed in time, and that the APDS wouldn't be affected at this point, but in the future it would be. So they're either trying to work out, how to work out APDS when it comes to how it's going to work, or maybe they've already done it and I've just missed it. But that's what I remember. I remember it talking about AP, APCBC, APBC, APHE, and also APCR, but they specifically said that APDS would be out. I'm actually just going to check that for you because I definitely remember them talking about it. So it should be page 3. There's been so much stuff over the last few weeks. It's actually been wonderful. There's been a ton of stuff going on. So here's the improved calculations. We are still working on APDS shells. Information about them will appear a bit later than the aforementioned ammo types. So there you go. That's what I remember from the thing. So right now, APDS shells, at least from my knowledge, are not affected. Just because of what they said here. If that isn't the case, I apologize and will correct myself. Will ricochet angles for long rod penetrators receive a change? Pre-change, they are a fixed angle across many different shells with different velocities and tip designs. The target material is also not taken into account, when in reality, this has a big effect and can change the ricochet angle by a great deal. Revision of ricochet values for APFSDS shells was not planned in the near future. If and when the reliable information will be provided to improve and refine the ricochet parameters if necessary, for these shells, it will be considered in the usual order. So, even though I know a lot of people have been talking about with this ballistic update, they're not taking into account any historical values, it's all fictional, everything like that. No, the stuff you put into the calculator is still historical values. So if you do have any information about ricochet values for specific rounds, it is a good idea to throw them at them, so therefore they can implement them in the game, or, they can at least have a look at them and see if it's worth it or not. I definitely think the ricochet angles for the long rod APFSDS rounds, some of them is kind of odd. Like I've seen a lot of people complaining about how, especially on stuff like the Abrams, where you can bounce it off the upper glacis into the turret of the Abrams, which does sound a little bit odd, but then again, it kind of makes sense because of just the angle. Same with like the Leopard 2K and stuff. I think there might just be an issue with where it ricochets, but we'll have to see in the future how big of an issue this is, especially now we're going to get rank 7 vehicles coming in hot. So yeah, we'll hopefully, if you have any information on any of the values, chuck it at them, right? More information is power. If you have more information, you will be able to do more things with it. So I think this set is a pretty good set of questions and answers. It definitely talks about some of the constants that people may not have known about. Will it rest the issues that people have? No, because the issues are inherent with the system that they've created. The problem that people are always going to have with these formulas are the constants themselves. Because in order for it to be truly historical, the constants, such as they say, the density of the tungsten core, or the actual armor that they're hitting, or the actual hardness of the metal that they're using for the round itself, these have to change for it to be truly fully historical. And unfortunately, because of the way testing was done in the past, and also with new rounds, we do not have those values. So it's either we set a double standard, so you either live by this equation or you live by historical values, and then, as I said, we talked about the Pandora's box idea, or you throw everything into one boat. And I think in this case, it's much better to throw everything into one boat than to split it apart. So I like these answers. They're pretty direct. The only thing I think these are missing, just from a general point of view, would have been nice if in this area as well. And if you haven't read this, please go read it. Like, it literally just goes through all of the stuff that they talk about. It would have been nice if just for the general person, they just stuck the equations here, just so they're like, okay, this is this, this is this. Like, this is all you need to know. Thank you very much. see you later kind of thing. But anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and good luck on the Sea Voyage event if you're doing it, and remember to pick up the wonderful seal. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.